Millionaire's shocking discovery about his maid. Before we start the story, comment. Bella, were you watching from Saim woke up once again in the vast silence of his mansion. The heavy curtains covering the windows barely let the daylight in, as if they reflected the darkness that had filled his heart for years. He was a powerful man, owner of a vast fortune, but wealth no longer brought him comfort ever since. The disappearance of his daughter Sophia, life had seemed to lose its brightness. She had mysteriously vanished over a decade ago, leaving no trace, and since then, Wim had been tormented by pain and doubt. That particular day, he barely had time to process the dark thoughts that always surrounded him. A new maid was starting, a young woman named Louisa. The housekeeper had mentioned her weeks ago, talking about her competence and reserved nature. However, Yim hadn't paid much attention to the details. To him, all the new faces in the mansion were just passing shadows. When Yoim went downstairs to the living room, he crossed paths with Louisa. For the first time, she was standing with her back to him, arranging some items on the shelf. Her demeanor was simple, almost invisible, and at first glance he didn't pay much attention beyond what was necessary. But then something caught his eye around her neck. A necklace. His eyes immediately focused on the piece. The shape of the pendant made him freeze inside. It couldn't be. He took a few more steps to get a better look, and when he finally saw the necklace up close, his breath caught in his throat. That necklace, the same one his daughter wore the day she disappeared. Wim felt the ground beneath his feet falter, as if reality was playing a cruel trick on him. For a moment, he stood there, motionless, unable to look away. Louisa slowly turned, sensing his presence, and was startled by the shocked expression on his face. "Good morning, Mr. Wim. Can I help you with something?" she said with a timid smile, looking confused by his silence. Wayne tried to regain his composure, but his mind was still racing to process what he had just seen. It wasn't possible that necklace had disappeared with Sophia. How could this young maid be wearing something so intimate and specific? This he began, but his voice failed him. He swallowed hard and tried again. "That necklace you're wearing, where did you get it?" Louisa, a little unsettled, looked down at her neck and held the pendant between her fingers. "Oh, this necklace." She looked at it for a second as if trying to recall something. "My mother gave it to me. At least that's what she said before she passed away. But I'm not really sure I got it right after an accident I had a few years ago." "I don't remember much from that time." Her answer left Yim even more intrigued. The young woman seemed sincere. But the coincidence was impossible to ignore. The necklace was identical, the same shape, the same color. The engraved details, he had it made exclusively for Sophia. And now, after all these years, it was around the neck of a stranger. "I see." Wim replied, his voice shaky. "An accident?" "You said yes. It was a car accident." Louisa seemed hesitant to talk about it. "It was about 6 years ago. I was alone and suffered a serious head injury. I ended up losing part of my memory. It was a tough time when I woke up. My adoptive mother gave me this necklace, saying it had been mine since I was little, but honestly, I don't remember it." Her words echoed in Key's mind. Amnesia, a necklace identical to Sophia's. Something was wrong, very wrong. He felt the urge to press her for more answers, to demand the truth, but he held back. He couldn't scare her. Not yet. There was something in this story he needed to understand better. Yakim nodded, not letting her see the storm brewing inside him. "It seems important to you," he remarked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Yes, I suppose it is," she replied with a light smile. Not giving it much thought, Louisa went back to arranging the shelf, and Joan, without saying another word, slowly walked away, still processing what he had just heard and seen. When he reached the door of his office, he paused for a moment, observing her again. From a distance, there was something familiar about her mannerisms, something he couldn't quite identify, but it bothered him deeply. He entered his office and closed the door, carefully sitting at his desk. He rested his hands on his face and took a deep breath. His mind was buzzing with unanswered questions. Who was this girl, and how did that necklace, so significant and unique, end up with her? He would need to investigate. There was no way to ignore this, even if it was just a terrible coincidence. Huim couldn't let the situation pass without concrete answers. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of an old acquaintance, a private detective he had worked with before. Fernando, it's me, Joaquim. I need you to start an investigation discreetly. Of course, there's a new employee here. And I need to know everything about her in the following days. Yin watched Louisa more closely, still trying to process the strange coincidence. With the necklace, he saw her carrying out her tasks diligently, never showing any signs that she knew the impact that small object hanging around her neck was having. Her presence in the house had become almost unsettling. The millionaire maintained a facade of indifference, but inside the mystery was eating away at him. He wanted answers, but he knew he needed time. Fernando, the private detective, began his discreet investigation, and Joey anxiously awaited the first results one afternoon, while Haim was reading documents in his office. Louisa's voice echoed down the hallway. She was talking to the housekeeper about some deliveries without thinking. He got up and walked to the room, where he found Louisa adjusting some objects on the table. The necklace gleamed in the sunlight coming through the window. Louisa Huim called softly. She turned quickly, smiling kindly. Yes, sir. He hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity was stronger than any hesitation about that necklace you mentioned. Your mother gave it to you, right? She nodded, not noticing the growing tension in his voice. Yes, it was right after I got out of the hospital, as I mentioned before. I was in a coma after a car accident. She touched the pendant unconsciously, as if the simple gesture could help her remember something more concrete. When I woke up, my mother told me I had worn this necklace since I was little, but honestly, I don't remember it before. That Wayne leaned in slightly, never breaking his intense gaze at her, and you never asked where it came from or what it meant. Louisa frowned as if trying to piece together a memory that never fully existed. I did ask, of course, but my mother said it was a gift from a distant friend, someone who gave it to me when I was very young. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out anything more about that person after the accident. I was more focused on recovering than thinking about the necklace. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Only those who made it this far will get it. Comment French fries below, and I'd love to see your comment. Now let's continue with the story. Her response, Al, though coherent, did not ease Yim's uneasiness. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was the same necklace he had made for Sophia, the same necklace that disappeared along with his daughter Louisa's. Explanations, as sincere as they seemed, felt vague and incomplete. You said you suffered from amnesia, right? He asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. Yes, the accident was very serious. I lost many childhood memories and even some from a few years before the accident. Sometimes it feels like I never had those memories. They're just fragments that don't make sense. Wum felt a pang of compassion. There was something genuine in the way Louisa described her confusion. He wondered if she had any idea how important that necklace could be, or if someone from her past was deceiving her. I imagine it must have been hard for you, he said, softening his voice, not knowing exactly who you were before the accident. Louisa nodded slowly, a shadow of sadness. Crossing her eyes, it was sometimes I feel disconnected from my own life, like something is missing, but over time I've learned to live with it. Life went on and so did I. Now here I am. She smiled, and there was something brave about that smile, something that made Zaim feel a mix of relief and sadness. He thanked her politely and excused himself, letting her finish her task as he walked back to his office. His doubts only grew. Yakim closed the door and sat in his leather chair, his heart racing. Louisa's story, her memory loss, the necklace, everything fit in a disturbing way, with the mystery he had carried for so many years. But if she were Sophia, his daughter, how could she remember nothing at all? As he reflected, the phone on his desk buzzed. It was Fernando. Hayatim answered quickly. Any news, he asked, eager. We're still investigating, but there are some interesting things. I'm looking into her adoption records. It seems she was adopted by a woman shortly after the accident. It's strange that there aren't many details before that. Everything's a bit vague, but we'll keep digging. Huim frowned and asked, and the accident, what did you find? It was serious, just as she said. The police reported she was found alone at the scene. She was driving a car without any documents, and the exact cause of the accident was never fully determined. But I'm still trying to learn more about the hospital where she was treated. I'll need a few more days. Yim agreed and hung up. Although the answers were still far off, he felt like he was starting to uncover something bigger. Louisa might not have all the answers, but now more than ever, Jotun was determined to find the truth in the days that followed. Joachim kept to his usual routine in the mansion. But his mind was miles away. He continued to watch Louise. Movements around the house, observing her with a mix of fascination and anguish. It was impossible not to see traces of Sophia in her small expressions. The way she walked, even the meticulous way she arranged objects. Everything seemed in some way to echo memories he tried not to relive, but that haunted him relentlessly. Fernando the detective continued gathering information, but the details came slowly. There were gaps in Louisa's path that left Yaki impatient. She had been adopted shortly after the accident, and since then her life seemed to be a great mystery. The origin of the necklace remained an enigma, just like Louisa herself that morning. While Hakim was having breakfast in the spacious dining room, he received a message from Fernando. The detective had news and would meet him at his house later. Joey spent the entire day anxious about this meeting, hoping to finally get some answers when night fell. Fernando arrived as discreet as ever. He was a middle-aged man with a firm expression and a keen eye. They sat Joachim's office, the heavy curtains blocking any outside light, creating an almost claustrophobic atmosphere. "So what did you find out?" Joachim asked bluntly, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. Fernando organized his papers on the table, choosing his words carefully. "Louisa is an interesting case, as I mentioned before. She was found after the accident, without any documents. The car wasn't registered in her name, and to this day it's unclear how she got the vehicle. The woman who adopted her, Maria, appeared shortly after the accident and took responsibility. But there's very little information about this adoption. There's no clear record of who her biological parents were. And even the hospital documentation seems incomplete." Ewan clenched his fists. That didn't help much in solving the mystery in the accident. "What caused it?" Joachim asked. Fernando took a deep breath. It was a collision on the road. She was alone in the car and crashed into a tree. The impact was strong enough to leave her unconscious for weeks. She suffered a brain injury that resulted in the amnesia. As she mentioned, however, something caught my attention. One of the medical reports mentioned a birthmark, something that could help us identify if she is really. Sophia Haim's heart raced. What kind of birthmark? A small spot on the lower back. Discreet but unique. Wayne suddenly stood up, pacing back and forth in the room. His missing daughter Sophia had an identical birthmark. It was a detail he remembered vividly, something he had mentioned several times when she was little. "I need to check," this Guim murmured more to himself than to Fernando. The detective nodded. "I understand, but be careful if she is really Sophia. You don't want to scare her or make her withdraw. She clearly doesn't remember much, and forcing a revelation could be harmful." Hakim agreed, though his mind was elsewhere. The idea that L.A. could be his daughter, that Sophia was alive, and so close to him, was overwhelming and terrifying. At the same time, he desperately wanted to embrace her and tell her everything would be all right. But reality was more complicated. If she truly didn't remember, how could he guide her back to her true identity without breaking her in the process? Fernando stood up. Gathering his papers, "I'll keep investigating. There are still some loose ends I want to pull, especially about the adoption and the whereabouts of the woman who raised her. But for now, be patient." Newton nodded farewell to Fernando, the weight of the revelation still fresh in his mind after the detective left. He returned to his office, where he stayed for hours. Reflecting the next morning, Yim decided he needed to proceed with caution. He couldn't just confront Louisa, but he knew he needed some concrete evidence. From a distance, he watched her work peacefully. She already seemed well adapted to the house, and her manner was always calm and efficient. That afternoon, he found her in the garden tending to the plants. It was a place Sophia had always loved, and seeing Louisa there stirred something deep inside him. Haim approached slowly, and Louisa greeted him with a soft smile, still focused on her task. "Are you settling in while here?" he asked, trying to start a casual conversation. "Yes, sir. It's a beautiful and peaceful place. I really like it here," she replied, still kneeling on the grass, pulling out weeds. Yuame hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You mentioned you don't remember much from before the accident. Doesn't that bother you?" Louisa paused for a second, looking up at him with a slight hint of sadness in her eyes. Sometimes, yes, it feels like I had a life before the accident that was completely erased, like I was someone else. Those words touched Jahim deeply. He looked at her so vulnerable, and for an instant, he saw his daughter in her face in her gaze, Sophia. But how could he be sure? Have you ever had any memories from before? He asked, trying to control his anxiety. She thought for a moment. Fragments, maybe strange dreams that feel like memories, but nothing clear. The silence between them was heavy, as if they both knew they were saying more than just simple words. Gwem almost asked about the birthmark, but stopped himself. It wasn't the right time yet. Well, if you ever need anything, I'm here, he said with a forced smile. Thank you, sir. She responded with the same gentle tone as always. Im walked away, trying to keep his composure. He knew he couldn't keep putting off the inevitable. He needed proof, something that would confirm or dismiss his suspicions. But with each passing day, he became more convinced that Louisa and Sophia were the same person, and that left him standing on the edge of an emotional abyss, unsure of how to move forward. The doubt that assumed Yim grew stronger. Each day, Louisa continued to go about her duties in the mansion, seemingly unaware of the emotional weight she carried each time he saw her. The millionaire's heart tightened a little more. The coincidences were too many, but without solid proof, he felt trapped in a web of uncertainties. Deep down, his hope that Louisa was Sophia grew stronger by the day. But he needed confirmation that left no room for doubt that night, as silence filled the mansion. Jim was once again in his office, lost in thought. The darkness around him mirrored the confusion inside him. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the flow of his thoughts. It was Fernando, and Jaim answered immediately. Jaim, I found some more information about Louis' accident. The detective began, his voice cautious. It seems the police report on the accident isn't complete. There are mentions of a second car at the scene, but authorities were never able to locate the vehicle. I see, Lee. The suspicion is that someone fled the scene before the police arrived. Hakim frowned, his heart racing. And the adoption, any updates? Yes, and this is where things get even stranger. The adoption process was done quickly, and unusually, the woman who adopted Luisa Maria had little financial means and no history of previous adoption requests. It seems everything was settled within weeks, which is highly uncommon. And there's more. What is it? I found some records from before the accident. There's evidence that Luisa, or as she was called back then, lived with another family, but the details are fragmented. They moved suddenly, and after that, Luisa was adopted. It's as if her past was erased or covered up by someone. These new revelations intrigued Jim even more. Louisa's past was full of gaps, and now there was the possibility that someone had tried to hide something important. So she wasn't alone before the accident. I murmured, and someone doesn't want her past to be uncovered? It seems that way. I'll keep investigating. But it's something for you to keep in mind. Be careful when dealing with Haruatim. We still don't know who's behind all of this, said the lawyer. Yim thanked him and hung up, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier. The mystery surrounding Louisa was only deepening, and the sense that he was getting closer to a dangerous truth wouldn't leave him in peace the next morning. Gwen was determined to find out more. He approached Louisa cautiously, trying to handle the situation without raising suspicion. There was one detail he could no longer ignore. The birthmark Fernando had mentioned, if he could verify it, he'd have real confirmation. Louisa was tending to the flowers in the garden again when Yim found her. She seemed at ease in that environment, as if the manual work offered a piece missing from her life. Good morning, Mr. Zakim, she said, smiling as he approached. Good morning, Louisa. The flowers are looking beautiful as always, he replied, watching her with an almost fatherly attention. How have you been feeling lately? Any new memories, any dreams about your past? Louisa sighed, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Some nights I dream of places I don't recognize. They quick images, fragments of moments I can't explain. It's like they're memories, but at the same time they feel unreal. I keep wondering if they're just products of my imagination. Yakim hesitated before asking what was really on his mind. These dreams, have you ever remembered anything from your childhood? Any marks, any physical detail that might help you recognize yourself better? She looked at him, confused. Marks? Yes, for example, a birthmark? Do you have one? Louisa furrowed her brow and touched her back thoughtfully. Well, I do have a small mark on my back, near my waist. My adoptive mother it was a birthmark. Yim's heart raced. This was it. The confirmation he needed was right there, so close, yet it felt out of reach. Can you show me? He quickly added, realizing the question might sound inappropriate. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be intrusive. It's just that this mark could be important in discovering something about your past. Louisa hesitated for a moment, but then with a slight understanding smile turned her back and lifted her shirt just enough to reveal the small mark on her skin. But Sophia was beginning to feel more connected to the life she had before the accident, and importantly, she was reconnecting with her father. The road to healing would be long, but they were ready to walk it together. The days that followed, Aim and Sophia's reunion were filled with mixed emotions, while there was deep joy in finding each other again. Both knew the journey was far from over. Sophia, still struggling to integrate her fragmented memories, and Jim, seeking justice for all that had happened, carried heavy burdens. The past that had separated them also pushed them toward the necessity of confronting those responsible. Yim knew that Augusto and the other accomplices were still at large. The lawyer confession had revealed the names of others involved, and determined to close this painful chapter. Yim involved Fernando in a mission to bring them all to justice. He couldn't rest until the people responsible for his daughter's kidnapping paid for their crimes. Meanwhile, Sophia, still adjusting to her true identity, grappled with conflicting emotions. She had grown closer to Ham, and the two spent long afternoons talking about the past. Hakim showed her old photos, shared moments they had before the kidnapping, and gradually Sophia began to feel more connected to the life she once had. However, she also faced deep emotional confusion. Her adoptive mother, Maria, who had raised her after the accident, was a significant figure in her life. And even though Sophia now knew that Maria had been part of a larger scheme, the love she felt for her was still real. Accepting the truth about her identity also meant questioning the entire emotional foundation that had supported her life until now. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Sophia finally brought up the subject that had been bothering her dad. I understand everything that happened, and I know you want these people to pay for what they did, she said softly. But I still feel lost, Maria. She raised me even though it all started in the wrong way, and I loved her. How can I process all of this? Shakim stopped walking and turned to look at his daughter. He knew this would be a difficult issue for her, Sophia. I never expected any of this to be easy for you. Maria was the mother figure you had for so long, and I understand how much she meant to you. But you need to understand that she was part of something much bigger, something that took you away from your true life. Sophia nodded, but the confusion remained. I understand that, and yet I still see her as the only mother I've known. I know she was manipulated, just as I was. I know the love she had for me was real, and that's what hurts, knowing that she was used to. How do I reconcile that, Wayne? Sighed, recognizing the depth of his daughter's struggle. He couldn't deny the impact Maria had on Sophia's life. She had played the role of mother, even under twisted circumstances. What Maria did for her, you can't be erased, and the fact that you still see her with affection shows that despite everything, she gave you something important. Maybe she was a victim too, but we can't forget that in some way she allowed you to be taken from your true life. Sophia looked down, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know how to forgive her, and at the same time I feel like I need to. Wayne stepped closer and embraced her. His heart heavy, he knew that Sophia's heal process involved more than just accepting her true identity. She would have to grapple with complex feelings of loyalty and love for someone who raised her under questionable circumstances. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what happened, Hakim said softly. It means you can find peace to move forward. You have every right to feel the way you do about Maria, just as you have the right to seek the truth about who you are. And I'm here to support you every step of the way. Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew that accepting her true identity was only part of the healing. There was a growing need for reconciliation within her, reconciling the love she felt for Maria with the truth she now carried that same week. With the evidence in hand, Huim and Fernando finally turned everything over to the authorities. Austo and the other accomplices were arrested, facing serious charges. Though it was a crucial step toward bringing justice to Sophia's story, Joe team knew that the arrests wouldn't erase the years of pain and separation. Even so, when the news of the arrest came, Huim felt a sense of relief. It was a chapter that was finally starting to close. He had done everything he could to ensure that those who had torn his family apart paid for their actions. And now he could focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding his life with Sophia one evening. Days after the arrests, Sophia sat with your team in the garden under the stars. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a peace they hadn't felt in a long time. I still have a long way to go to accept all of this, she said with a slight smile. But I'm happy to be here. With you knowing those people won't hurt anyone else brings me a bit of relief. Yakim held his daughter's hand deeply, moved. We're in this together, Sophia. We always will be. They sat in silence again, gazing at the stars for the first time in years. There was hope justice had been served, and now father and daughter could finally begin to heal the wounds of the past. The dawn of that morning felt different. The sunlight that streamed into Yim's mansion seemed brighter, warmer, as if nature itself was in harmony with the new phase. In his and Sophia's life, the past few months had been challenging, but somehow they had found their way back to each other. Sophia, now with more clarity about her identity, was gradually reconnecting with her former life. The memories still came in fragments, some clear, others hazy, but what mattered most was that she finally knew who she was. And more importantly, she was allowing herself to be part of the family that had once been stolen from her that morning as U-Team sipped his coffee on the veranda. Sophia joined him, a light smile on her face. She seemed more at peace, more comfortable with herself and the life she was rebuilding alongside her father. Did you sleep well? Wodka asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. Yes, actually, I think I slept better than I have in years, she replied, laughing softly. I think things are finally starting to fall into place. Yakim smiled. His heart warmed at seeing her so much lighter. I'm glad to hear that you've been incredibly strong. Sophia, I don't know if I could have gone through all this the way you have. Sophia looked at her father with tenderness. She knew he had also carried the weight of her disappearance for many years, and now they both needed time to fully heal. There was still much to process, but being together, rebuilding the bond that time had weakened, was already a big step. I think we're doing pretty well considering everything that happened, she said thoughtfully. I still feel a bit divided at times, the memories of my life, as Louisa are still with me. But I'm learning to reconcile who I was with, who I am now. HTIM nodded, understanding. I don't expect you to forget what you lived through as Louisa. That's a part of you. What's important is that you're here living in the truth, and together we'll move forward. You have your story, Sophia, and I'll be by your side for whatever comes next. Sophia smiled, feeling the warmth of Yim's words. He was the father she was beginning to remember, caring, protective, but most of all present. And what will the next chapter be, she asked with a hint of curiosity. Wayne took a sip of his coffee before answering. Whatever you want it to be. Life is full of possibilities, and now you have the power to choose what you want. Whether it's continuing to work here, traveling, studying, or even something completely new. What matters is that you have the freedom to be whoever you want to be. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Only those who made it this far will get it. Comment mansion below. And I'd love to see your comment. Now let's continue with the story. The idea of an open future brought a new sense of excitement to Sophia. For so long, she had lived a life built on half truths, not knowing who she really was. Now she had the chance to rediscover not just her identity, but also her desires and dreams. I think I want to try some new things, she said, reflecting. Maybe travel, see more of the world, explore parts of myself I haven't discovered yet. Wayne nodded with a smile. I think that's a great idea. You deserve it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the gentle morning breeze. Sophia looked out at the horizon, feeling a mix of serenity and hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of control over her own life. She knew the journey to this point hadn't been easy, but now with her father by her side, she was ready to face the future with confidence. Dad, thank you for never giving up on me, she said, breaking the silence. Haim looked at her, his eyes misty, but with a soft smile on his face. There wasn't a single day I gave up, and now that you're back, we make the most of every moment moving forward. Sophia smiled, holding her father's hand. We will. The gentle wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and life around them continued in harmony. Father and daughter had been through a journey of pain, loss, and reunion. But above all, they had rediscovered the love and connection that had never truly been broken that day under the warm, bright sun. Sophia and your team began walking a new path together, a path of healing, redemption, and hope, ready to live the life that had been taken from them with the certainty that no matter what happened, they would face it together as it was always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional narratives like this one, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know what you thought of this story. Your participation is very important to us.